When doing word studies, our most important tool is using a lexicon. A lexicon is a dictionary for the ancient language we're looking at, so either Greek or Hebrew here. And so lexicography is the study of lexicons and how they've developed. So this is important so we know what our tools are, the different methods behind our lexicons and how they're put together and so on. So the main question here that we're going to answer is how do English translations and dictionaries get their definitions or their word meanings that they come up with? And ultimately, they examine how this word has been used in context and so on, and then through context and so on, they determine what it means. And there have been three general phases of different methods for how we should come up with the definition. So the first phase is historical philological semantics. And this was an older phase where the focus was on comparing historical changes of words and etymologies. So etymology being the study of root meanings and so on like that, how roots of words have developed over time and changed from one language to another and so on. And therefore focusing on comparing other similar languages, other languages, cognate languages that have similar roots and developed from the same root over time. And so lexicons that are in this phase are Thayer's, which is the main lexicon online for looking at Greek, and BDB, which is the main lexicon for Hebrew. So our free online Hebrews, our free online lexicons are in this phase. So just to point that out. So I have here just some examples of etymology and how it can help. So here the first one, we have cognate like the English house, we know is developed from the Proto-Germanic husa, and then comparing it to other Germanic type languages, Indo-European languages like German and Dutch, we can see similar root, similar meaning, and so on. And that can help us. The problem is it doesn't always work. So like English deer and German Tier both developed from Proto-Germanic dusa, which means animal. However, in German, Tier means animal, but in English, deer does not mean animal. In English, over time, it has become more specific and it refers to one particular kind of animal. And this is common. This is common in languages. This is just how language works. And so looking at etymology and cognates, comparing languages, isn't a sure way of coming up with a word meaning. So, phase one was criticized heavily in the 1960s. And there was a new phase here, which I'm going to call structuralist semantics, that rather than focusing on etymology and the develop of a meaning over time, they emphasized that there is a single meaning of a word and we need to look at it in that specific time period. So, because a English speaker, just think of a modern English speaker, we don't think of etymologies of words as we use them. Like understand. We don't think of standing under somebody. Or even we have words like in King James, conversation. Conversation meant to, your conduct, your way of life. Where in English now it means to talk. We're conversing with one another. And so, but no English speaker thinks of that meaning and thinks of that every time they use the word conversation. We think of words how they're used in our specific time period. And so that's what structural semantics did. And often what they did is they compared how a word was used with its synonyms and so on to get a specific meaning. So TD&T, which was in phase one, it's a giant dictionary, really good, helpful dictionary in many aspects, but If you were going to go to TD&T and look up prayer, you would get an entry of Efchi and Efchome, and it would give you a history of development of these two words and how they're used in different time periods and so on. The problem is there are many other words that correspond to our understanding of prayer. So, like, just think in English, we have prayer and entreaty, a supplication, a plea, and even sometimes we pray without even using these words. So, if we want to do a study on prayer, we can't just look at specific words. We need to look at concepts. So phase 2 strongly distinguish between words and concepts. So Lowenida is a phase 2 lexicon, lays out all of the words and idiom expressions and so on, and distinguishes them so that you can see a more full, broad range of the word prayer and the different ways, different types of prayers, different words used, and so on. And so Lowenida is kind of the pinnacle of phase 2 for lexicons. And there's a free version of Lowenida. It's not the full version, but this online version gives you all the different words in a category. It just doesn't give you the full definition. It'll just give you like a one word explanation. And so phase 2 also looked at meanings close in time, and we talked about some of these. We talked about conversation, that older meanings words often evolve. They evolve in their meaning. And so we can't trust old meanings to determine our new meanings. We need to be careful because words do change over time. And this can be seen in just reading older translations like the King James or the ASV or the Revised Standard Version and so on. And so when we look at a word, and under phase 2 especially, the progression of examination is to look at how an author or how a book uses a specific term. And then we want to look how the author uses that term. And then the whole New Testament into the Septuagint and outside other Koine literature. And then throughout that, looking at etymology and other cognate languages and so on. But we need to try to get as close to the time of the author and how he's using that word. I'm going to skip that for now. Okay, the problem is that here phase 2 often distinguished words and concepts too much. Okay, words and concepts are distinct, but like we looked at, Evchi still teaches us something about the concept of prayer. So we can't separate them too much. We need to bring them together. And so cognitive linguistics has been helpful in bringing these two back together, that thinking of the cognition of how words are used. So a helpful way to talk about this is the difference between a dictionary entry and an encyclopedia entry. So think of the biblical use of the word king. Okay, we're reading, and we read that David and Saul are kings. Okay, first we need to talk about how to best translation. How would we understand this? Simply, it is a king. King is the best word, a ruler over a nation, right? David was a ruler over the nation, Saul was a ruler of the nation, and so on. But what we need to point out is that if there was an encyclopedia entry of the word king back in the day, it would be significantly different from our encyclopedia entry. When we think of king, we think of monarchs and so on, where back in the ancient world, king had to do with divine sonship, that the king was much more connected to the god, and they were almost like a priest to the whole nation, and so on. So when we do a word study, it's not enough to just determine what the singular use of the author and what he intended in that time period. We want to tap into what was the cultural baggage of that word in that time so that we don't read our ideas of king into the ancient idea of king. So ultimately, how we want to do a word study is we need to look at context. We want to, our main goal is to hear the word as the author intended his audience to hear it. No more, no less. We don't want to put more meaning that the author didn't mean. It's not as if there's a bunch of, like Greek and Hebrew are normal languages. They're not divinely inspired, dropped from the sky and so on, and every word is loaded with theological meaning that needs to be unpacked and delved into and so on. No, it's as much of a language as English is. And so we need to study Greek and Hebrew, their languages, just like we would study any other language. And so when we want to determine what the meaning of a word is, we need to look at what is the singular sense intended by the author. So my example here is think ball. If I said Cinderella went to the ball, you don't want to apply into that meaning every meaning of the word ball. Cinderella didn't go and play with rubber uh, toys that are used for different sports and so on. No. The, when I say Cinderella went to the ball, I'm intending a singular use of the word ball, which has to do with a dance. And so getting to that singular sense that's intended and determining the cultural baggage. What did a ball look like back then? Is it different from today? Is it, and so on. So finding the singular sense and also what is the cultural understanding or how is that word or concept worked out in culture. So here's just a suggestion is that we don't want to view our study tools as inerrant. Like I pointed out, our free lexicons online are back in phase 1, and often there's those problems with etymology and cognate comparison. And so we just need to understand that there are those shortcomings, but they're still important. All those studies can help us get to the cultural baggage and content, and even lexicons in general survey the word widely in the Bible. And so they can help us get a full array of how the word is used in different senses and so on. But they are put together by humans just like us, but they are also put together by scholars who are a lot smarter than all of us. So um, don't view them as an errand, but use them as a tool because that's what they're intended to be. So just as review, we went through the 3 phases of lexicons here. Phase 1 focused on etymology and cognates of other languages. Phase 2 critiqued that and wants to focus on the use in time. Synchronous means the time period of the author. So focusing on how it's used, the singular meaning in time. And then phase 3 is trying to bring those phases together by saying like, yeah, we need to separate words and concepts, but they are still related. And so when we examine a word, we want to think in terms of a dictionary entry, what is the singular use of the word, but also encyclopedia. What is the cultural baggage behind this word? How would have this word and concept been understood in the culture of that time period? So this can help us then when we go and do word studies ourselves. We know we need to understand what phase our lexicons are in, and also this can help us to better understand what the biblical author and what God intended through the biblical author to communicate to us.